We welcome all of you to our Zadok Bible Study, All Nations House of Prayer and Worship. And we've just been having a time of sharing testimonies back and forth, seeing what the Lord has done. And I'm excited to be able to be here for Bible study because God's doing amazing things. He really is. And I know there's a lot of horrible things out there, but the light is shining. The light is shining brighter and brighter and brighter. And our eyes need to not be on the darkness and the death, but our eyes need to be on life and light. And so the light of Christ is shining. I wanted to share something, just a few little simple things here, but they're big. Linda Hartzell is one of them. Linda Hartzell's gone through some health challenges, but I'll tell you, she's coming through bigger and better and glorious. I mean, it's wonderful. So keep it up. God's doing a great work in her. But I saw a picture of her, and it was on Facebook, and she was a warrior. And she was dressed up with Marissa and the two of them. And I thought, Linda Hartzell, look at you go. So it's very important that we don't just give up and say, oh, woe is me. And I need to move on with Chuck. So, okay, go ahead. Wait, I have to get the microphone. Okay.
I must confess I was not a warrior. I was a human green bean.
You were a human green bean. Well, why did it say warrior?
Marissa was my drill sergeant.
Oh, Marissa was the drill sergeant. But you know, green beans can be warriors too. Just like Marcia was the other day.
VeggieTales.
Yeah. So anyway, no, it was a great picture. You know, seeing the two of you and just seeing you, you're just coming out of everything. You're moving forward. And I love seeing that. And last weekend, I can't go into a lot of detail. We had a short clip of time, but we got to spend a beautiful clip of time with Chuck and Dee Worth and also David and Debbie Vaught. It was absolutely wonderful. We were in Branson, and you know how God loves to bless you in so many ways? It's not just in a service. It's not only in a prayer meeting. The church is movable. It moves. And we had church. We were playing games and we were laughing and eating and rejoicing. And God is good. So I just want to tell everybody that we're excited. God is moving, and I'm so glad to see all of you. And we'll look forward to what's God has prepared for today. Sherry's leading worship, and Chuck is going to be the speaker, and Scott's going to introduce Chuck Class.
We are blessed to have Chuck Class here with us this morning, and of course his lovely wife, Joy, and both of them have been associated with our fellowship and our ministry here for quite a few years. And Chuck has been a very strong component working with Gideons for many years, spoken in many churches, and he's a true man of God, a man who loves to study the Word and likes to find the bottom line of things. He likes to find the facts. So, Chuck, we are honored to have you here sharing with us this morning. Bless you.
Thank you. Jesus is Lord. And the topic this morning will be how the science supports the Bible. And I used two versions of the Bible. I used the New King James, or the King James, and the One New Man Bible. And the reason I used the One New Man Bible for the first two verses is I was confident that the Jewish scholars would have the best translation. So that's listed here. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Second verse, and the earth was totally empty, devoid of all life. And then they reference Jeremiah 4:23. I saw the earth, and lo, it was totally empty, and the heavens, and they had no light. Then it follows on, both animal and plant and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. To say that the earth was formless or chaotic is an incorrect translation according to the Hebrew scholars. And verses 3 to 5 I did not print here because it was in reference, of course, to God creating light, and that is not pertinent for the subject. But what do we have on day one? Oh, first of all, day as used in Genesis is a 24-hour day. Yom, as used in Hebrew for a day, appears over 800 times and is clearly a 24-hour day. Exodus 20:11, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them. So what do we have on day one? We have a huge sphere of water void of land and all plant life, plants and animals. We also have the Spirit of God hovering, brooding like a hen over eggs over the face of the water. And the Spirit was really creating an electromagnetic force field necessary for all communications for the life of plants and animals to come, without which there would be no life. And that science has clearly proved that that is necessary. If we had no magnetic force around the surface of the earth, then there would be no life. And of course, there also had to be gravity, and of course, we can all be sure that happens, because every time you drop something, it's going to go straight down. No matter where you are on the earth, it happens. So what are we saying here? Because people have indicated that they thought there was a gap theory between verses 1 and 2. But there is no chaos, no millions of years, no Satan, no need to explain dinosaurs, no evolution, no scientific proof of evolution. And I'll talk more about that later. And in Isaiah 40:22a, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth. So there was the indication in the Bible that the earth was round, as it referred to the circle of the earth. Now, centuries have passed, and it was a long time before the earth was proved to be round. Actually, I've run into some people that even now, they're not convinced the earth is round. And it's very unfortunate, but clearly science can show it is round. Actually, a man named Eratosthenes in Egypt back in 275 calculated the circumference of the earth to be 39,350 kilometers. And now the true average is 40,033 kilometers. Pretty good for somebody. Actually, he was a Greek, but he was born in North Africa, so that's why I referenced Egypt there, because that's where he was doing his work. Well, even Columbus, when he sailed the ocean blue, it had not been established that the earth was a sphere. Was the Lord, the writings of Columbus, it was the Lord who put into my mind the fact that it would be possible to sail from here to the Indies. I could feel his hand upon me. All who heard of my project rejected it with laughter. There's no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Spirit, because he comforted me with rays of marvelous inspiration from the Holy Scriptures. I am a most unworthy sinner, but I have cried out to the Lord for grace and mercy and they have covered me completely. I have found the sweetest consolation since I made it my whole purpose to enjoy his marvelous presence for the execution of the journey to the Indies. I did not make use of intelligence, mathematics, or maps. It is simply the fulfillment of what Isaiah had prophesied. Remember the circle of the earth. And to finish it off then, he quoted, "The far distant idols wait for my love." And then Isaiah 49:1, "Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, ye people from afar." Well, what they had been doing in order to get spices from the Far East, they had to go east. But now he's sailing west. So it's a pretty clear indication the earth had to be round, or he wasn't going to get there. So, but he points out he was really led by the Lord. Well, to continue on with Genesis in 1:5, "And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." Now, can you visualize? You've got this sphere, but then you've got another sphere, because how do you separate the waters from the waters? You have to have a second sphere. There has to be something there. Well, this was to divide waters from the waters. The purpose was also to filter out damaging ultraviolet rays from the sun on the earth, which cause the light to be light pink on the earth, and regenerate the earth's magnetic field. This is necessary to make a good atmosphere for the earth. Continuing on, Genesis 1:9, "And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." So this is the first time we have dry land. Remember from the day one, it indicated it was just water. But now the dry land appears. "And the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good." Then in verses 11 through 13, God brought forth grass, herbs, and trees, all after their kind, on day 3, and God saw that it was good. The atmosphere was different from what it is now. Now the question might be, well, how could they determine it was different? But there are samples, and they could get amber samples that had, we'll just say, air in them, and they could analyze what the atmosphere was like from the amber samples, which contained the atmosphere of the time. So the atmospheric pressure was double what it is now, and the oxygen was 21%, and carbon dioxide was down to just 0.25, and the magnetic field was 8 times the present. The light was a gentle pink. So this describes the atmosphere. So a Japanese professor decided to set up this atmosphere, and he grew a cherry tomato bush 40 feet high and produced 11,000 baseball-sized tomatoes in 14 years. 15,000. Well, that's over 14 years. Not in one season.
So in one season, was it 11?
Pardon?
Did you say then in one season, was it 11,000?
No, the only information I have is that it was 40 feet high and produced 11,000 baseball-sized tomatoes. Then there was another plant, a lapidendron, which is now grows to be about an 18-inch plant, and that was noted in the fossil to be 120 feet tall. So you can see here, when they're talking about people living 900 years old, the atmosphere wasn't the same as we have now. It's that strong magnetic field and the oxygen-rich atmosphere, just a wonderful atmosphere. Well, plants thrive on carbon dioxide. They need it so they can produce oxygen. And of course, if you had a biology class, you'd know this was photosynthesis. And the increased dioxide is not causing climate change. Some greenhouses actually add it to enhance plant growth. It does improve the plant growth if you give them more carbon dioxide. Science verifies what's happening. To complete the process, we need a sun, carbon dioxide, of course, and water and soil. And God provided it all. So we have this cycle where you have a carbon dioxide provider. Of course, every one of us is providing carbon dioxide, taking on oxygen. If you burn fossil fuels, you provide carbon dioxide. So it's necessary for the whole process that God has set up here. And science can clearly prove that, you know, if you take one of those things away, well, you aren't going to have plant growth. You aren't going to have anything living. So at this time, I would like to bring out a testimony from a scientist here, an astrophysicist, Dr. Hugh Ross. There's a typo there. It's not Rose, it's Ross. And it's from Why the Scientists Are Turning to God. And I had hoped to meet him. We were in California. We did meet his pastor, but didn't have the opportunity to meet him, though. But here's his testimony. Dr. Ross is an astrophysicist, Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of British Columbia, Master of Science and PhD in Astronomy from the University of Toronto, and a research fellow on quasars and galaxy as a postdoctoral student at California Institute of Technology. He turned to God when he noticed the precision of the universe and the accurate account of Genesis relative to science. Since then, he founded reasons to believe, an outreach organization that has led many scientists to believe in the Bible based on hard evidence research. In an interview in September 7, 2001, Ross explained how his education as an astrophysicist built his belief in God to the point that he was willing to help other scientists understand it. Through his ministry, which has spanned more than 15 years, he has explained in great detail how precisely the Bible meets the scientific record. This has caused many physicists and scientists to reconsider biblical accounts and facts. Ross, like Dr. Craig Hazen, indicates that in the hard science groups, there has been no significant change over time in the acceptance of God. The soft sciences tend to be the areas that have dropped off because of Darwinian evolution theories, higher criticism, and the Industrial Revolution. Ross did indicate that many physicists, and especially microbiologists, are turning back to God based on new information from the recent discoveries on the mapping of microbiology. One very interesting event that Dr. Ross discussed was a time during the Cold War when he was invited to go to the Soviet Union to speak. Expecting to speak on virtually any subject but God, he found overwhelming support to speak about science and God. After the lecture, one of the Supreme Delegates, the front, stood up and said, "You don't have to convince us about God. 70 years of failure without him as to demonstrate he exists." At the end of the presentation, an invitation was given to accept Jesus as Lord, and people were encouraged to write down their decision for Christ. Since there was a shortage of paper in the Soviet Union at the time, pieces were being torn in two and passed out. At the end, hundreds of scientists of the Soviet Union accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior. I mean, there are just so many things that are so precise. No, like a few of them, like the tilt of the earth. If the earth wasn't tilted, problems. The distance from the sun, the effect of the moon, the planets and all revolving around the sun. I mean, everything is so precise that there had to be a creator. I mean, does all that just happen? Well, then moving on here, I have a list of scientists, and they each have something really to say. Just starting with Leonardo da Vinci. Of course, he was the great artist that did The Last Supper, which I can't believe that anybody has not seen that picture of The Last Supper. But he was also the greatest experimental scientist of his age. And one of the things that happened there was a fellow named Copernicus, who was a Polish, and he came up with the earth revolves around the sun, not that everything revolves around the earth. And he had written his discovery up, and because of the Catholic Church, he kept it undercover. Well, Galileo followed up with that, and he didn't keep it up or cover, and the Catholic Church ended up quarantining him. He was put on trial, and they decided that he'd have to be in home arrest for the rest of his life.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, that's why in my notes here, then, I put Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in 1517. And from there on, you see at that time, all the discoveries that were made, and they were made by, let's put it this way, non-Catholics. So you had Johann Kepler developed the laws of planetary motion, and he was the first to identify the Christmas star, which was the Jupiter and Saturn close together. And then, of course, there was Galileo. Excuse me, I was wrong there when I mentioned Da Vinci. It was Galileo that was put in house arrest because of what he had discovered. Then Francis Bacon developed scientific method. Blaise Pascal developed law of pressure. And he said, faith is God felt by the heart. Then Robert Boyle developed the law of pressure versus mass for gas. And then Sir Isaac Newton developed laws of gravitation, motion. Was probably the world's greatest scientist. He did so many things, but he was also a devout Bible scholar. And there was an indication that he had written some commentaries. Well, I won't spend any more time. I'm just trying to go through these rather quickly as far as these scientists that all were Bible believers. Linnaeus developed the system of classification of organisms. Faraday developed laws of electrolysis and induction. Sir Frederick Herschel discovered over 500 stars and said that truth comes from the sacred writings. And then there was Joseph Henry, electric motor and galvanometer. And Dr. James Simpson discovered chloroform's anesthetic qualities. And I would like to read his testimony here. Dr. James Simpson, born in 1811, was responsible for the discovery of chloroform's anesthetic qualities, leading to its medical use worldwide. He also laid a solid foundation for gynecology and predicted the discovery of the X-ray. Dr. Simpson was president of the Royal Medical Society and royal physician to the Queen, the highest medical position of his day. He stated, Christianity works because it is supremely true and therefore supremely livable. There is nothing incompatible between religion and science. When asked what his greatest discovery was, Dr. Simpson replied, it was not chloroform. It was to know I am a sinner and that I could be saved by the grace of God. A man has missed the whole meaning of life if he has not entered into an active living relationship with God through Christ. Then there was Lord Calvin, discovered absolute zero at minus 73 degrees centigrade. George Mendel, laws of foundation of genetics. James Clerk Maxwell developed magnetism. Louis Pasteur, a germ theory led to pasteurization. Arthur Compton, and I'm going to read Arthur Compton's testimony here. Science is the glimpse of God's purpose in nature. The very existence of the amazing world of the atom and radiation points to a purposeful creation, to the idea that there is a God, an intelligent purpose back of everything. An orderly universe testifies to the greatest statement ever uttered. In the beginning, God. And then there was Samuel Morse that invented the telegraph. And do you recall what the message was, the first message that came? What had God wrought? What hath God wrought?
This is really good.
Then there was Sir Joseph Lister, founded Antiseptic Chirurgy. And he clearly stated he believed in Christ. And then there was Albert Einstein. Quite a individual. In 1905, Albert Einstein first published his theories on relativity, from which he eventually developed his formula for the atomic bomb. Though not commonly known, Albert Einstein once told a group of rabbis in New York City that he had done a rabbinical study of the Hebrew word for light in Genesis 1:3 and 1:14 and arrived at his conclusions about relativity. He noted that the two terms are not alike. The light in verse 3 appears to be a divine source, while the light in 14 appears to be a different order, meaning from light. Rabbis believed it to be the primeval light, the source of the Shekinah glory. Einstein took the word for light and by a complex series of grammatical divisions and substitutions arrived at the words for mass, light, speed, raised, and squared. This led to the Jewish genius to discover the E energy that could be derived from mass multiplied by c squared of the constant, the mathematical constant commonly assumed to be the speed of light. Albert Einstein discovered this infallible formula from an ages-old, accepted, and proven rabbinical method for interpreting the depths of Hebrew as the biblical image. He not only proved that the formula works, but that the original author of the formula placed it in the opening chapter of the Bible. Einstein was truly a scientific genius in that respect. He never believed that the universe was one of chance. Some of Einstein's personal statements are, God reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists. God does not play dice. Science without religion is blind. Religion without science is lame. Science can only be created by those who are thoroughly imbued with the aspiration toward truth and understanding. This source of feeling, however, springs from the sphere of religion. To this, there also belongs faith and the possibility that the regulations valid for the world of existence are rational, that is, comprehensible to reason. I cannot conceive a genuine scientist without that profound faith. Now, let me read this very interesting email that was sent to my wife. Did God create everything that exists? Does evil exist? Did God create evil? A university professor at a well-known institution of higher learning challenged his students with this question: did God create everything that exists? A student bravely replied, yes, he did. God created everything, the professor asked. Yes, sir, he certainly did, the student replied. The professor answered, if God created everything, then God created evil. And since evil exists, and according to the principle that our works define who we are, then we can assume God is evil. The student became quiet and didn't respond to the professor's hypothetical definition. The professor, quite pleased with himself, boasted to the students he had proven once more that the Christian faith was a myth. Another student raised his hand and said, may I ask you a question, Professor? Of course, he replied. The student stood up and asked, Professor, does cold exist? What kind of question is this? Of course it exists. Have you never been cold? The other student snickered at the young man's question. The young man replied, In fact, sir, cold does not exist. According to the laws of physics, what we consider cold is in reality the absence of heat. Everybody or object is susceptible to study when it has or transmits energy, and heat is what makes a body or matter have or transmit energy. Absolute zero, minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit, it's a total absence of heat. And all matter becomes inert and incapable of reaction at that temperature. Cold does not exist. We have created this world to describe how we feel if we have no heat. The student continued, Professor, does darkness exist? Of course it does. The student replied once again, you are wrong, sir. Darkness does not exist either. Darkness is in reality the absence of light. Light we can study, but not darkness. In fact, we can use Newton's prism to break white light into many colors and study the various wavelengths of each color. You cannot measure darkness. A simple ray of light can break into a world of darkness and illuminate it. How can you know how dark a certain space is? You measure the amount of light present. Isn't this correct? Darkness is a term used by man to describe what happens when there is no light present. Finally, the young man asked the professor, Sir, does evil exist? Now, uncertain, the professor responded, Of course, as I have already said, we see it every day. It is in the daily examples of man's inhumanity to man. It is in the multitude of crime and violence everywhere in the world. These manifestations are nothing else but evil. To this, the student replied, Evil does not exist, sir, or at least it does not exist unto itself. Evil is simply the absence of God. It is just like darkness and cold, a word that man has created to describe the absence of God. God did not create evil. Evil is a result of what happens when man does not have God's love present in his heart. It's like the cold that comes when there is no heat, or the darkness that comes when there is no light. The professor sat down. The young man's name was Albert Einstein.
That's really, really, really
Is that part of what can be used to describe what's... Is that part of what can be used to describe what's happening to America when there's more of an absence of God? When the church hasn't gotten the word around enough?
Yes, yes. To continue on now, God is in control of the weather. Genesis 7:4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Exodus 9:2. And Moses said unto him, As soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands unto the Lord, and the thunder will cease, neither shall there be any more hail, that thou mayest know how the earth is the Lord's. Deuteronomy 11:17a. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, that there be no rain. 1 Samuel 12:17a. It is not wheat harvest today. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain. Psalm 147:17. He casteth forth his ice like morsels. Who can stand before his cold? Matthew 5:45b. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. And finally, Job 37:9 and 12. Out of the south cometh the whirlwind, and the cold out of the north. By the breath of God, frost is given, and the breath of waters is straightened. Also by watering he wearieth the thick cloud. He scattereth his bright cloud. I think it's pretty clear that God is in charge of the weather. Weather scientists have generated formulas that leave out the effects of sunspots and clouds, the greatest variables, because there's no way they can predict these variables. Therefore, their predictions are totally inaccurate and misleading many, in particular the liberals who talk about the need to eliminate fossil fuels in order to save the planet. The weather will not always vary from hot to cold, but will not destroy the planet. In his book, Dark Winter, How the Sun is Causing a 30-Year Cold Spell, John L. Casey, who had been studying sunspots for 10 years, plotted a cyclical pattern which shows we have begun a slow cooling of the Earth, which is expected to reach a peak in 2030. This could be a very cold year. I found his book to be quite interesting and quite thorough. And he had all the information to back up what he was saying. And we are, in fact, the Earth is cooling right now. Slow, but it is actually cooling now. I enclosed here another article by Carmi Henry, The Unvarnished Truth About Carbon Dioxide. It presents a very good picture of the climate change. And of course, in this particular instance, when it comes right down to it, most of the carbon dioxide right now from fossil fuels is coming from China and India. And it'll continue that way because they have made no commitment to do anything about it before the year 2030. So we're just going to continue to have a problem. And what is the problem? The problem is that we don't need to stop using fossil fuels because it isn't going to do any good. It's that simple. Well, let me talk about evolution for a minute here. I'll call it the incredible theory. Biogenesis is the basic axiom of biology. Biogenesis means that life only arises from life. It does not come from non-living matter. Professor Vernon Gitt put it this way: there is no known natural law through which matter can give rise to information. Neither is any physical process or natural phenomenon known that can do this. In other words, pond slime cannot create the DNA which contains the code describing who an individual will be. I picked up another book. I didn't reference it here, but it says there are 5 unsolved problems of science. So one of the problems described there was the problem that science couldn't figure out or solve this problem of how life can come from pond slime. That was listed as an unsolved science problem. Well, there are an awful lot of scientists that'll say it can never be solved because it can't happen. It just can't happen. So I've listed here some questions which evolutionists cannot answer. That's why does evolution not conform to the first and second laws of thermodynamics? Has science ever produced life from lifeless substances? How can consciousness come from mindless matter? Why does the fossil record not support evolution? What and where in the Bible are anti-science positions? I actually put that in a letter, and it was in the paper a couple of years ago, and nobody ever came back with any answers, except one professor from the University of Arkansas sent me a note and said, well, for the second law of thermodynamics, you can only do that in a closed system. Well, let's face it. Let's look at the bigger picture. Does anybody ever have everlasting life on this earth? Take King David, for instance. He's described in the Bible and all. And of course, he had a palace and everything else. Well, where is it? Well, it just decayed. So that's the sum and substance of the second law of thermodynamics, which they call entropy. And that's that life doesn't, or things don't increase and get better, they just get worse. Well, then God said, let grass, herb yielding seed, the fruit tree, great whales, every living creature that moveth, winged fowl, cat, creeping things, and beast after his kind. Have we ever seen them multiply other than after their own kind? I just picked out one here, and I was reading a book I had here, and I counted the number of different kinds of cats, and I came up with 75. But because of the genes and the combinations you can have, you know, there can be a lot more cat types, dog types, any kind of animal types, human types. In other words, human types would probably be one of the greatest. As the years go on, there are more and more and more because the genes keep getting mixed up every time. And they were set up that way, you know, because of the animals that went in the ark. You know, they weren't absolutely identical. They each had different genes in the pair. So when they kept multiplying and multiplying, you know, you kept getting these combinations and you kept getting different types. And it just went on and on that way. Well, I did put this additional letter that was in the paper, and after that other first one, and here's science can't explain the following. How consciousness could come from mindless matter. The chemical transitions from lifeless substances to that complex system of interacting molecules that display those behaviors we call life remains chemistry's biggest unsolved problem. That's from chemistry, Professor Charles Wynn. The law of biogenesis states that life only comes from life. The fossil record in no way supports transition of one form of animal upward resulting in man. Renowned atheist Harvard professor Ernst Mayr admitted in his book saying, "The fossil record remains woefully inadequate to prove evolution." I have his book. Anthony Flew, also a renowned atheist, stated science has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements that are needed to produce life that intelligence must be involved. Evolution fails the test of two long-standing laws of thermodynamics. The first law states that neither matter nor energy is being created or destroyed. Therefore, how could the forms of life we now have evolve from non-life? The second law states everything is running down, that is, going from organization to degeneration, not evolving to a higher level. No one has ever proved any case of upward evolution to a higher, more complex kind. There are many cases of horizontal variations, mutations, extinctions, and deteriorations, but none show evolution to another species as demonstrated by the fossil record. Previous claims for intermediate forms have been proven false. When the geology staff of the British Museum of Natural History and members of the Evolutionary Morphology Seminar at the University of Chicago, a very prestigious body of evolutionists, were asked, "Can you tell me anything you know about evolution that is true?" No one replied. With the above evidence and having an engineering degree, I have faith to believe Genesis chapter 1, word for word.
That is good. That's really good.
Now,
It needs to be recorded. Speaking of this.
Okay, I've just been very impressed by this and am enjoying it extremely. But I just wonder how many years it took you to put all this together.
well, I have lots of books. So, I mean, in actuality, I just started putting it down on paper last week. Yeah. Because if you look at the end here, you see the material on the last page there that I have been through and I'm totally familiar with.
Yes, definitely.
Well, there's one thing here I want to bring out because this question arises, and that's aging methods. Bible dating, the Bible shows the earth is approximately 6,000 years old. Then there's carbon dating. The radioactive isotope of carbon-14 is present in all living things. The half-life of carbon-14 is 5,730 years. That means in that amount of time, it will be well on its way of turning into carbon-12. By measuring the ratio of the two, they determine the life of the specimen. Now, the maximum number of years that can be reached in the specimen is 80,000 years. However, an estimate of this amount of carbon-14 and carbon-12 in the specimen at death must be made. The estimate could result in a value of 6,000 years. In order to get higher values, you use the present condition versus the past. 6,000 years ago was not the same as the present. In other words, they failed to want to take into consideration what the atmosphere was 6,000 years ago, or whatever time they're trying to measure, which is totally inadequate and is terrible science. Well, then they have the other radiometric dating. They need this because in order to try to justify evolution, they need a long period of time, and they pretty much have decided they need like 4.6 million years. So in this method of dating, samples were submitted of known specimens that of fairly recent rocks formed by lava flows, which were given values over 1 million years. Well, like I say, they were known specimens, and when they were given to a laboratory that does the work, they said, well, they're over 1 million years old. And in some cases, they were only 70 years old. So this system is completely unreliable using materials such as potassium with the same approach as carbon dating. In other words, here they look at potassium with a half-life of 1.25 billion years. And that progresses to argon. So if you get the picture here, when they talk about half-life, you have half-life, and then it's half-life again, and it goes, so it keeps going downhill till you finally end up past the potassium molecule will turn into an argon molecule. And up above on the carbon dating, the carbon 14 turns into carbon 12. So they measure this progression down. But if you don't have the information on when the specimen actually died, and but you assume that, well, he died under the conditions of the present, and you're looking at a specimen that was before the flood in particular, you're just going to get the wrong answer. You can't get the right answer. So when we talked about hard science, that's really science that's proven. Then, so if you hear the word soft science, forget it. That isn't really even science when it comes right down to it. Well, I have a few other things here I'll read through quickly. Incidentally, if anybody is interested in a great article on Columbus, it was in the American Family Radio magazine, an article on Columbus. I have a copy here, if that is of interest to you. But let me go on and talk a little bit about the Bible. Scripture tells us in Job 28:25, wait for the wind. Air has weight. No. My wife asked me, how much does air weigh? And I was going to try to get that answer, and I didn't have time. I'll get that answer for her, and if anybody else wants to know, ask me next week. The Bible and science of oceanography Matthew Maury is considered the father of oceanography. He noticed the expression paths of the sea in Psalm 8.8, written 2,800 years ago, and said, "If God said there are paths in the sea, I'm going to find them." Maury then took God at his word and went looking for these paths, and we are indebted to his discovery of the warm and cold ocean currents. His book on oceanography remains a basic text on the subject and is still in universities. Bible and ship dimensions. In Genesis 6, God gave Noah the dimensions of the 1.5 million cubic foot ark he was to build. In 1609 at Hoorn in Holland, a ship was built after the same pattern, revolutionizing shipbuilding. By 1900, every large ship on the high seas was inclined toward the proportions of the ark. Bible and radio waves. God asked Job a very strange question in 1500 BC. He asked, "Can you send lightnings that they may go and say to who you are we, or we are?" This appears to be a scientifically ludicrous statement that light can be sent and then manifest itself in speech. But did you know that all electromagnetic radiation from radio waves to X-rays travels at the speed of light? This is why you have instantaneous wireless communication with someone on the other side of the earth. The fact that light could be sent and then manifest itself in speech wasn't discovered by science until 1864, 3,300 years later, when British scientist James Clerk Maxwell suggested that electricity and light waves were two forms of the same thing. Quarantine. Well, we've had quarantines here. But in Leviticus 13:46, all the days wherein the plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled. He is unclean, he shall dwell alone. Without the camp shall be his habitation. I remember when I was a boy a few years ago, they came around. For instance, if you had measles or mumps, they would come around and put a sign on your front door noting this person is in quarantine. And I don't know, has anybody had that experience where you had a sign on your front door that says, "This house has measles"? Oh, yes. Very interesting. Well, I think I'll just sort of repeat this here because I've talked about this before, but just to emphasize, plants need sunlight, water, and minerals in order to grow and to make their own energy and food. If plants do not get sunlight and yet have water and minerals, they cannot produce chlorophyll. They will die. It is interesting to notice the chronological order of Genesis creation. God created light first, then he created water, then soil, then he created plant life. So it's bum, bum, bum. Now, if you start to try to put hundreds of years in between those, it won't work. It pretty well says that it has to be the timeline. Creation of the earth in 6 days. Well, I think I'll conclude now. Perhaps somebody would have a question. Yeah,
I just had a question in reference to when you were referring to the dimensions of the Noah's Ark and they had, where they went back and made their own ships after that model. Would that include the big cargo ships that are now, that we're seeing now that can hold tons and tons of weight, was based on that same pattern?
well, if you look at the, the ships just as they're sitting, you probably, if you looked at TV, you see them sitting in the harbor out there by Los Angeles. They are very similar in size to the Ark. Have you ever been to the Ark? Okay. If you haven't been there, it's quite an experience.
I just wanted to say. Sorry. I just wanted to say, too, that they're very similar in shape to Noah's Ark. I've noticed, because I've seen a replica of Noah's Ark, and then looking at what we see out there in the harbor, it's amazing, it really is.
Gosh, this was good, Chuck. Such great information. Thank you. I have one thing I want to ask. We talked about the weather, how God is in control of the weather, but we see that it's not the way it's supposed to be now. Is that because of the sin of man and what we have done to the climate and, you know, the airplanes up there and everything? And even back in Jesus' day, I mean, he took authority over the weather, over storms. So could you answer that for me?
When you say the weather's not the way it's supposed to be,
Well, the tornadoes and the hurricanes, and, you know, those are damaging things, and I don't think God creates damage. That's my question.
well, that depends on how you look at it. When it comes right down to it, you can talk about it in the book of Revelations, you know, that we're supposed to have these kinds of things happening. Well, if you look at the records going back for, let's say, for tornadoes and these various violent happenings of the weather, there hasn't been any great change. They cycle up and down, but in the overall, there has been no real big change, let's say, in the last 100 years. If you went back 100 years ago, you'd find that, you know, if you're at the right part of the up and down, you'd find that it's roughly about the same.
But why are we given authority over it then? I mean, because we don't want people killed and we don't want damage. So, you see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, but the Bible said it was going to happen. So it's just happening.
It's okay to take authority over it to protect our area and our family and.
We can certainly pray about it.
Okay.
Because, you know, what I was saying is God controls the weather, but he also controls what's happening in the earth.
Sandy has a question too.
I just have a comment. Air weighs 14.7 pounds per square inch. So-
Yes. Yeah. That's the pressure.
That's every square inch. That's the kind of pressure we have on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could I just mention one thing in my, this is Chuck's wife speaking. And we're from Minnesota. We've experienced more weather than you from Arkansas. I mean, more different weathers. And we lived on a lake, just in part of the Twin Cities. And our lake had an island right behind our house. And we would invite our church groups to use the picnic area that belonged to the homeowners at the island. And we would pray about when to have a meeting. And everybody was invited, and there was no, variation of dates. And the weatherman could say whatever he wanted. But we never had to cancel any picnics because our God does control the weather.
Mm-hmm.
He created it all, and he knows how.
Amen. That's good.
I just want to back up to what Sandy just said. She mentioned the pressure of the air on the earth. But that's not the actual weight of the air itself. Because it's stacked up, so to speak. But if you were to take the air itself, see, it's different because it is a gas, so it compresses. So it would weigh more down below than it does up. It depends on how high up you are. So if you went up further, then it would be less.
Anybody else? Dee?
Just a simple little question, Brother Class. What was your engineering degree in?
Mechanical engineering. Yeah, it was 5 years then, so we had to take some extra stuff, which they don't take now. We had to take things like philosophy and and biology and some other things. So I got an extra year there because it was 5 years at the time.
Anybody else?
I think he needs a standing ovation.
Yes, it was excellent. It was very excellent.
I think Sherry has a question.
We have another question.
It's not really a question, but it's something that I just want to just comment. It's about the glory of God and the weight of the glory of God, that there's an actual physical weight to that glory that comes upon us. And I don't know, I just was on my mind to just comment on how wonderful our God is, and that his presence itself is felt, and that we know that he's a weighty God.
Yes. Well, we want to thank you, Chuck, for a wonderful presentation. And there's a lot for us to chew on, right? And you could each go and pick up one of those books and study them, and it's tremendous. This is the kind of information you want to get out to kids in school that are educated from a different perspective and haven't had the opportunity. Maybe their own families haven't studied it or looked into it at all. And so they're brought up by a different law. I remember in biology class when I was in high school, I had some books by Gordon Lindsay, who was president of Christ for the Nations. And he wrote some things concerning biology and evolution that showed the different perspective between God and Darwin's theory. And I remember taking it up and showing it to my biology teacher. And she looked at it a little bit and said, "Where do you go to church?" She came from a different persuasion than me. But as a young person, I wanted to know truth. And if there's ever a time when people need to know truth, it's this day and this time. And it's exciting days we are in. Thank you so much, Chuck.
I have this article, if anybody is interested in Columbus, because I think you have seen that they're tearing Columbus statues down and all, and making it into somebody he was not. So this article is really a good one.
Yeah, I might mention, in conjunction with that, there's a tremendous book called The Light and the Glory, written by Peter Marshall
Yes.
Jr. and David, was it David Manuel? David
David Manuel.
Yeah, David Manuel was the, before, of course, before he passed away, his wife was Shelley Baker, who is now married to Barry Landon.
Celebrated their second.
Yeah. Yeah, her artwork is back in the prayer room of a vision the Lord gave her years and years ago of the American flag and how the stripes related to the blood coming out of the side of the Lord. And the picture has the pilgrims on it, it has the Mayflower on it, she has the Revolutionary War, has the presidents, the Constitution, has all kinds of things in it that God showed her in vision. And it's been displayed in Congress and many other places. Let me get it.
I got it.
There you go. Praise God.
Well, yeah, just say.